Hi, Bob. The principal suggested I meet with you, our school's math coach, at the end of the year.
Great. What's up?
Principal Cuomo wants me to examine my classroom's performance in mathematics on a recent state test, but I'm not really sure why.
No worries. Principal Cuomo told me you'd be stopping by.
Oh, okay.
Here's the class report. Let's identify which domain assessed by the recent state test should be a priority for your classroom next year.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's first make sure we know what we are looking at. This test represents 3 broad domains of mathematics content, which includes 8 more specific subdomains. For example, ILS 4.0a, Operations and Algebraic Thinking, represents one broad domain of mathematics content, and using the 4 operations with whole numbers to solve problems and gain familiarity with factors and multiples represents subdomains of mathematics content within that domain.
Okay, and we are trying to figure out which one to emphasize next year?
Yes, exactly. In these columns are average percentages of questions answered correctly by students in your classroom, the school, and the district. Such percentages are reported here for both the 3 general domains and the 8 specific subdomains.
Got it.
These percent correct values right here are average percent correct. They are summarizing percent correct scores across a group. It's telling us what average or typical performance is in these groups: students in your classroom, students in the school, and students in the district.
But it doesn't have any information about how much variation there is within these different groups.
That's exactly where I was going with that. Yeah, what to emphasize and how to do it may differ depending on whether all the students are very similar or different from one another.
You're right. My assessment professor in undergrad used to say that all the time.
Unfortunately, that is all we have in the standardized test summary report, but we can probably assume that they do vary.
Well, that's the sense I get from my classroom assessments. My students are all over the place.
That's typical. Let's take a look here at what they did. It looks like their performance is a little lower than the school for all the dimensions.
How do they compare to the district?
Well, I'd focus on the school because the students in the same school are probably more similar to students in their class. They all come from the same neighborhoods. It is a fairer comparison.
Okay, makes sense. So if students in my class are doing worse than other students in the school on all dimensions, which skills should I emphasize this year?
That is kind of a judgment call. One way to decide would be strictly based on the data.
What do you mean?
Emphasizing the domain with the lowest average percentage correct.
Okay.
Or emphasizing the domain for which average performance in the class is most below the school average.
But here it looks like none of the average percent scores are way below the others.
Yeah.
And they always seem to be about 5 to 10 points lower than the school overall.
Yes, exactly. So another option is to use your professional judgment. I mean, they're doing poorly in all areas in both an absolute and relative sense, so which one is most important?
Most important?
Well, for the future and their learning in the future. Mathematics is vertical. Later learning builds on earlier learning.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, to me, the most important content seems to be within number and operation in base 10.
Okay, I agree that content is pretty essential and foundational. Instructional change is hard, so I want you to be able to focus on one thing, for this year at least.
Okay, but which specific instructional strategies should I use to teach students that subdomain? Or are there certain materials I should use?
Most of your students are ELLs, right? I noticed that when I was looking in the student information system just before you came in.
Yeah, there's a lot.
The school should probably try to distribute them more evenly among teachers next time.
Yeah, do you have any practices for working on number and operation in base 10 with those students?
Let's see what we find on the What Works Clearinghouse. There is a repository of research-based instructional strategies assembled by the federal government.
I've never heard of that.
Really? There is a repository of some of the best educational evidence out there.
Oh, I wonder why I never learned about that in my pedagogy classes in undergrad.
That's a good question. The facility probably didn't know that, but let's pull it up right here.
Okay.
It looks like they have it organized by topic area, so we could look in either the mathematics or English learning areas.
Neat.
The practice guides down here may be particularly helpful too, so let's look there.
It looks like this one is focused on math.
And there's more down here.
I'll have to check them out to see whether they touch on number and operation.
And there's also a practice guide for teaching academic content and literacy to English teachers in elementary and middle school. There may be some useful ideas in there around content area instruction for ELLs.
That sounds helpful.
You can also search the site, so let's try and search for place value, because that is a big part of the skill in the domain you want to focus on. Oh, it looks like this third one has some content on place value and operations.
Great.
It looks like this is actually a transcript to a video you can watch.
Thanks. I think this should get me started with some things to read and watch over the summer.
Great. These are the kinds of resources I'd like you to rely on. Nothing makes its way into the site unless it's been thoroughly vetted. There's a lot of rubbish out there.
Yeah, thanks for making me aware of them. I had never heard of this site.
No problem. But just before you go, I also want to provide you with an instructional research guide.
Oh?
The WhatWorks Clearinghouse is the first one, but there are also many other high-quality resources here.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. Goodbye.